what is your vision on the future of DeFi, and what do you see as the biggest risks? Matt, why don't you start with that?
Yeah, this is one that's been on my mind recently, particularly from the view of like, what are we talking about when we say building a DeFi platform? When you talk about the future of DeFi, like the thing that just kind of as a quick little anecdote, we've had a bunch of questions from people saying like, hey, is Radix going to support Web3? And my reaction to that is always like, what do you mean by Web3 exactly? And so I don't know if people noticed, but there was this little survey we snuck out recently that was sort of like, it was a one-line question of like, what is Web3? And we got actually a bunch of responses, and it was really interesting. And it kind of confirmed what I suspected, which is like, people actually have a lot of different ideas about what this thing is. It's not one notion. But the interesting thing to me is that there is sort of it feels like there's this common unconscious concept that the world is starting to awaken to, and it's causing, and it gets expressed in different terms in different places, kind of depending on everyone's perspective of what they find important. But it's when you talk, like, to me, like DeFi, Web3, even the metaverse, like these are all kind of, I think, have like a 90% overlap between them. At the fringes, people have kind of particular ideas about where they go, but really there is this common notion of moving to, and again, this is my opinion on it, because if you're asking about the future of this, like to me, the big thing that's happening here is this notion of self-sovereign ownership and self-sovereign control. And that underpins a lot of these other ideas. Like when you talk about the metaverse, even, it's like, well, what is the metaverse? Well, we actually already have all these little independent universes. It could be World of Warcraft. It could be a simulated city. It could be Twitter. Like these are all, if you think about it, universes. But the metaverse idea that I think seems to be gathering steam is stitching those things together. Well, how do you stitch those things together? It's by ownership. And ownership is really this concept, the idea that you need to be able to carry, I need to be able to carry a representation of my identity or my money or whatever it is from one universe to another verse. And once you have that, you have a notion of a metaverse that actually is useful. This even gets to like data. When we talk about, digital twins of cities and things like that, like you need to have data and ownership that kind of is portable between systems. So it's the same thing with DeFi. Like to me, the reason why we've settled on DeFi is, to me, that's the closest concept to the thing that a decentralized ledger like Radix can do in this ecosystem, is providing a reliable democratic ownership layer for assets and identity and all these things. And so, unfortunately, DeFi also carries these connotations of like, well, what people start narrowing down to like DeFi is like, well, it's just the things happening in DeFi today, or finance itself feels like, well, okay, it's just going to be banks and that, or the alternative to banks. Whereas to me, DeFi is, if you have an in-game economy in a massively in an online game, that in-game economy, if you have the ability of carrying ownership outside that game, becomes DeFi. And the same mechanisms that you built for a totally boring financial system, you could apply to the in-game economy in a game. So to me, there's this is the exciting thing that everyone's awakening to, is that all this stuff stitches together. And so we picked DeFi because we felt like that was the most central term, but really it's like it's Web3, it's the metaverse, it's all these things. And I think the potential for that concept, this idea of democratized ownership and tying together these different things and having some notion that I can carry these things between different applications and universes I interact with, that has a lot of potential, but it's going to take a long time. Like the barriers to this right now is like the user experience for this really sucks, even when you're staying within a fairly narrow set of applications. So the idea of like, well, you want to be able to carry an asset across these different representations, these different networks, is like that. That's a whole other level of user experience problem. And it's going to take a very long time for that to be explored, but it really is holding things back. In fact, this is one, again, to allude to the wallet concept we're working on, like this is where we are actually putting a lot of thinking into what does the total integrated user experience for a platform like Radix need to look like to be able to serve as the basis for this big vision that I'm talking about for the future. If we believe that Radix is going to underpin this kind of system by having ownership, what does it need from not just a technology point of view, but the ability to create things on that platform as well as the user experience of it? So I think it's very embryonic right now. There's lots of things holding it back, from scalability, which is the one that kind of tends to be everyone's mind from a technologist point of view, but it's also the fact that it needs to be not just acceptable to build on it, but it needs to like actively enable building of really wonderful things in that kind of new system. And this is what Scripto is about. So, yeah, that's my view on it. It's a lot of potential, but I mean, this is why Radix exists, is to solve this problem, to be able to meet that long-term potential.
And solving a problem is one of the things that we always have in mind. Like, what is the end state, and work backwards from that. Many projects going like, well, what's the immediate problem? And if we solve that, we get one step further along the road. And then we solve the next problem, we get one step further along the road. And one of the things that really is so inspiring working at Radix is, even from the very start, with like when Dan looked at DLT technology and blockchain technology, it's like, work backwards. If this was a global scaled system, what would it need to, how would that work? What would that look like? What do we need to consider and get in place now? And the vision of DeFi, and ultimately Radix as well, is that the global financial system has about $400 trillion of value in it. And that is just with what is there today. And when you're talking about things like NFTs, the metaverse, in-game economies that could all suddenly become part of this global financial system, if it's running on DeFi, suddenly that $400 trillion doesn't even encompass that. So
it's like new kinds of ownership that didn't exist before that you can now express on this kind of open ledger, which is super exciting.
It's like, and it's coming from CES, like one of the things that I get asked a lot is like, oh, well, how does this work? And like, with banks, is it like, is DeFi competing with banks? And it's like, well, it's just a different way of setting it up, just in the same way as like, did the internet destroy newspapers? Well, some sprung up, and then we also got YouTube. YouTube wasn't possible with a printing press. And this is now like, who thought there'd be vloggers? Like, there's this whole massive expanse of things.
Justin TV thought there'd be vloggers.
Before the internet, did they? But yeah, it's like this whole massive thing where, and like, it's my favorite slide we've ever produced is the one Matt, I think, was it Matt or you, Piers, that did the like DeFi today 200 billion is this like tiny square, and then like 400 trillion. Yeah.
That was Piers, yeah.
It's like the Jeff Bezos, you've got $1 million, it's a grain of rice. This is how many grains of rice just like Jeff Bezos has. It's like, that's a concept your brain just is blown away by. So yeah, that's the vision. And as Matt said, the biggest challenge is that we are in the innovator stage. We're not even at the point where MySpace thinks everyone should have a profile song, like, and realize that wasn't the smartest move. Like, we've not even got there yet. So lots to learn.
Yeah, and I don't think that there are, like, what do you think see as the biggest risks? There isn't at this stage. I don't think there is anything that could fundamentally take down DeFi. Like, decentralized finance will adapt to whatever the roadblocks that come down the road are, and be that, sort of regulation, or be that increased consumer protection, or any of those things. Like, that is just part of now taking into account the full ecosystem that is necessary to replace traditional systems for financial products with a better way of doing things. But like, for it to work with the real world, it has to integrate with the real world. It is not separate to, aloof from, or like it wants to integrate with society. It wants to integrate with the mass market. It wants to be part of our everyday. And for that to happen, there's a bunch of stuff that it has to be able to do, and that will come in time. Like, but at the base of it, it is a system for the efficient allocation of capital. And if you have a way of making assets programmable, and if you have a way of them instantly moving between opportunities, and you have a way of creating objects and incredibly complicated organizations that all interact on this same like layer that is supranational and incredibly resilient and robust, then you have something like that potentially changes human history in the same way that the internet does. And I think that momentum is already there.
It becomes inevitable. It's just there's too much of a gravitational pull towards that. It's a matter of what's the road to get there and what form does it take, but it's going to happen.
Right. So like I think that everyone can look back at this time and be proud to be early backers of DeFi, and be proud to be early community members of the space. Like, in many ways, the thing that excites me is not so much that any one company or any one organization is going to be the winner here. It's that we are in a state of becoming, and that we are all helping that happen. And the if you are motivated by being a builder and being part of that movement, then you are in one of the most exciting like collective endeavors of human history that's going to ever happen in our lifetime. And so I think that is, for me, the hurdles that come there'll be many challenges, but I think that that's the ultimately thing that excites me.
And the people that are in right now are the people that get to have the fun of exploring all the things that you could never do with the system before. It's like when you talk about the efficient allocation of capital, it's again one of these things where like this is a very broad concept. Like that you could use that exact term to refer to a really cool set of NFTs. Like that is efficient allocation of capital, because basically this person has produced something which has caught the minds of people, and that has value. And so like we're now creating systems where value can flow to the creators of these kinds of things. It starts pulling in, before, if you wanted to be an artist that was participating in the financial system at large, you basically had to be one of a handful of really big name artists that like had the alliances with the big galleries, and they became, and basically rich people start sort of using you as a mechanism for storing wealth and so forth. Well, now this is everybody. Like now this is like you have things of value that can be down to a much granular level, which means that everyone can participate in it. And these platforms today are where you can start experimenting with what all that really means, that you could never do that before.
And it's like the early days of the internet.
Yeah, it's all going to be great stories. If you talk to anyone who was in the early days of the internet, they've all got great stories, even if they backed the wrong horse. Right. Like they still got great stories because they were part of something that ultimately changed the world.
Russell still frequently cites an early website from the internet that exists for some reason. What was it called, Russell?
Zombo.com?
Zombo.com.
Yep.
Zombo. Welcome to Zombo.
Don't know why it still exists, but it does.
Because it's one of the greatest things ever produced from a single mind.
It captured the zeitgeist of like 1998 or so.
Really did.
All right, I'm gonna close that out on Zombo.com. If you have never heard of it,
I don't think the site itself still exists, but the YouTube record of it does exist. Maybe it does. I don't know.
I think the website still exists.
It's still there.
It's still there. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And looking forward to chatting again next month, where we will have a new face amongst us as well.
That's right.
I'll have to awkwardly fit 5 faces into the frame.
Tiling problem.
Thank you very much.